The bells of St. Nye, Mary's tolled low and heavy as I clutched the edge of the pew. The smell of lilies filled the air, sharp against the burn in my throat. Charles' coffin rested at the front, polished wood reflecting the dim light from stained glass. My hands trembled as I pressed them together. Trying to hold myself steady, he was gone. The man who had built a life with me across 4 decades. The man who had always stood between me and the cold winds of the world. Lydia stood a few rows away, her black dress crisp, her chin lifted high as if she were presiding over some grand occasion instead of burying her father. I caught her eye once, searching for some glimmer of shared grief. But her gaze slid past me as if I were a stranger. Guests whispered their condolences, hands brushing my shoulder, but I felt as if I were wrapped in glass, watching everything through a haze of loss. After the service, mourners filtered into the church hall for the wake. Tables of coffee and sandwiches stood untouched as conversations hushed around me. Lydia approached, her heels clicking against the tile. She leaned close, her words soft enough for only me to hear, but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Dad's fortune belongs to me," she said. Her eyes narrowed, her mouth curling into a smirk that looked nothing like the little girl I once tucked into bed. "You don't deserve it. Get out of the house." I stared at her, too stunned to breathe. Around us, relatives spoke kindly, unaware of the dagger she had just driven. My daughter, the child I carried for 9 months. The one Charles and I raised with every ounce of patience and sacrifice, looked at me as if I were an intruder. I said, "Get out," she repeated. Straighter now, louder. "Don't make a scene." Heat rose in my cheeks as I felt the eyes of a few guests flicker our way. I wanted to shout, to tell her how wrong she was, but grief pressed down like lead. My legs moved on their own, carrying me past the tables, past the flowers, out into the sunlight where Austin's September heat hit like a wall. The church doors closed behind me, muffling the voices within. I drew a breath, steadying myself, already knowing I could not return to the house that Charles and I had built together. The heat of the asphalt shimmered as I crossed the parking lot. Keys clenched in my hand. I slid into the driver's seat, shutting the door against the muffled hum of voices still drifting from the church. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale. But it wasn't grief alone that made them shake. Lydia's words still rang inside me, hollowing out what little strength I had left. I started the car and pulled onto Congress Avenue. The skyline of Austin blurred by a wash of tears. The traffic lights flicked from green to red, but I barely noticed. All I could hear was Charles's voice, steady and deliberate, from those final evenings in the hospital. "Meredith," he had whispered, his hand cold in mine. "If they ever turn on you, you'll have what you need. Don't hesitate." At the time, I thought it was the morphine speaking, but then he had made me take his phone, guiding my hand to a hidden folder, an app, simple and bare, waiting for a single command. I hadn't understood then, but now, with Lydia's betrayal burning through me, I knew what he meant. I pulled into a quiet side street and cut the engine. My hands were steady as I unlocked my phone and opened the app. A single line blinked across the dark screen. Patient as stone. "Delete," I typed the word. Added 2 more immediately. Then I pressed send. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered, lines of code rushing past before it closed itself. I sat there, the air still around me, knowing that something irreversible had begun. By the time I restarted the engine, my phone buzzed with the first of many alerts. 2 days later, I sat in the polished conference room of Richard Hale's law office in downtown Austin. The blinds were half drawn against the sun, shadows striping the oak table where a thick binder lay waiting. My pulse thudded in my ears, but I kept my hands folded in my lap, refusing to let them see me tremble. Lydia swept in as though she owned the place, heels striking the floor with each step. She wore a black dress tailored to perfection, her hair pulled into a sleek knot, lips pressed into that faint smile that always meant trouble. Without even acknowledging me, she took her seat across the table and adjusted her phone on the polished wood, as if she were preparing to dictate the terms herself. Richard cleared his throat. He had been Charles's lawyer for more than 2 decades, a man of few words and meticulous habits. "We're here to execute the last will and testament of Charles Calhoun," he said. "All parties are present. We'll begin." He opened the binder and began to read, his voice measured, the legal phrasing dry. Lydia's expression barely shifted, her eyes gleaming with certainty. She expected every word to affirm her belief that she was the rightful heir. Then Richard paused. His eyes flicked up, meeting mine briefly before he spoke again. "The entire estate, valued at $31.5 million, is bequeathed in full to Meredith Calhoun." The room went silent. My breath caught, sharp and painful. Lydia's jaw dropped before twisting into fury. "That's impossible," she snapped. "This isn't his will. She made him change it. She manipulated him." Richard remained calm, sliding a small remote across the table. He pressed a button, and a video flickered onto the mounted screen. Charles appeared, thinner than I remembered him, sitting in his study. His voice was steady, though his face carried the wear of illness. "If you're watching this, it means I've gone. I chose to leave everything to Meredith, because she stood by me through every storm. Lydia, I know you expected more, but I saw the choices you made. Greed is not legacy." The video ended with his eyes fixed firmly on the camera, unyielding even from beyond the grave. Lydia slammed her hands on the table, face red, her voice a hiss. "You'll regret this. Mother, everyone will know the truth." Richard closed the binder, his voice firm. "The truth has already been spoken." I sat frozen, Charles' words still echoing in my mind, when my phone began to buzz in my bag. The drive north to Round Rock felt longer than it should have. The fields rolled by in a blur, the September sun pressing against the windshield. But my mind was elsewhere on Charles' face in that video, and Lydia's fury that seemed to linger in the air long after she stormed out of Richard's office. When I pulled into the gravel drive of the ranch, the old farmhouse stood quiet, its white paint weathered but familiar. Miguel Reyes was already waiting on the porch, his frame steady, his hands folded. He had served our family for more than 20 years, tending the land, fixing what broke, and watching our lives unfold. "Señora," he said softly as I climbed the steps. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had witnessed too much. From his pocket he produced a small brass key, tarnished with age. "Mr. Charles asked me to give you this. He said you would know what to do." My throat tightened as I took it. Miguel led me inside to Charles's study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco, as though he had only just left. I approached the oak desk, my fingers brushing over the worn surface until I found the locked drawer. The key slid in smoothly, clicking open with a finality that sent a shiver through me. Inside lay several journals, their covers faded blue, leather edges frayed. I pulled one out and opened it. Charles' handwriting curved across the page, steady even in anger. Lydia asked for another loan. 50,000 claimed it was for her business. When I hesitated, she threatened to cut ties. I gave in. "I doubt I'll see it back." Another entry detailed how she'd removed antiques from the house, selling them quietly at auction. Another spoke of meetings where she pressured him to transfer company shares. I sank into his chair, each page cutting deeper than the last. It wasn't just about money. It was the betrayal of trust. repeated and relentless. I closed the journal, my hands trembling, as the doorbell echoed through the empty house. The bell's echo still hung in the air when I opened the door to find a young courier shifting nervously on the porch. He handed me a padded envelope, asked for a signature, then hurried back down the steps. Inside, I found a stack of printed screenshots, posts from local forums, Facebook groups, even neighborhood email lists. Each one carried the same thread that I was unstable, greedy, manipulating Charles's estate to shut Lydia out. Some posts even accused me of forging the will. My stomach turned as I flipped through them. Lydia's tone was unmistakable smooth, venom wrapped in sympathy. My poor mother isn't well. One message read, "She can't handle money. And Dad never trusted her with business. Pray for us as I try to protect what's left." By the end of the week, the whispers had spread through Austin like wildfire. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on me. One neighbor who'd brought casseroles after Charles' funeral crossed the street to avoid me. Invitations that used to arrive without fail fell silent. The silence hurt worse than the words. I tried to stay grounded, reminding myself of Charles' foresight, of the journals he left behind. Still, the isolation seeped in, night after night. Even Miguel, loyal as he was, could not soften the ache of seeing people I'd known for years choose gossip over memory. It was Sandra Price who showed up first, her briefcase heavy with documents. "I know what she's saying," she said, dropping papers onto the desk. "But here are the company ledgers. Charles trusted me to keep them clean. Every loan he gave Lydia, every cent she took. It's all here." Later, Omar Patel arrived, laptop under his arm. He didn't waste words. "The posts trace straight back to Lydia's accounts," he said, tapping keys until lines of code scrolled across the screen. Different usernames, but all the same IP. She's running this smear herself. I wanted to believe that would be enough, that the truth in records and code would silence the lies. But even with proof, the damage had already spread. Sandra admitted 2 of the trucking company's largest clients had called, uneasy about the inheritance dispute. One was reconsidering their contract. That night, I sat at Charles' desk, the journals spread open before me, and felt the old weight of loneliness pressing in again. It was one thing to be betrayed by my daughter. It was another to see friends, neighbors, and business partners begin to doubt me too. The phone buzzed with another alert, another post from Lydia, this time with a photo of her standing before Charles' portrait, eyes wet, her caption pleading, "All I want is what's fair." The comments below surged with sympathy for her. Strangers calling me selfish, cold, even cruel. I closed the phone, heart heavy, as the night stretched long and unyielding. The following afternoon, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and the low hum of engines outside the ranch. I stepped to the porch, shading my eyes against the sun, and saw 2 sleek cars idling by the gate. Lydia emerged first, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt as she strode forward. Arms crossed, face set in triumph. "Open this gate," she called, her voice sharp enough to cut through the stillness. "You can't keep me out. This is my father's land, my inheritance. Everyone knows it." I stood on the porch, hands steady though my chest burned. "This isn't your place, Lydia," I said. "You have no claim here. Leave." Her laughter rang out, high and practiced. "You think a piece of paper and some old man's video mean anything? People know you're unstable. They know you've twisted this." She motioned to her companions, who began filming on their phones, confident in their performance. What she hadn't counted on were the neighbors. A few had gathered along the roadside, curious at first, but soon pulling out their own phones. I saw Mrs. Jenkins from down the road lifting her camera high. catching every word Lydia spat across the gate. "You'll regret crossing me." "Mother," Lydia hissed, "I'll tear this facade down." Brick by brick, the gate remained locked, the red light on the security panel glowing. I turned away, refusing to fuel her spectacle further. Behind me, the farmhouse loomed steady, silent witness to a fight I hadn't chosen. By evening, the video was everywhere on local forums, on neighbors' feeds, even picked up by a small Austin news outlet. For the first time, Lydia's cruelty was no longer mine to bear alone. The courthouse in Austin smelled faintly of dust and coffee, the kind of place where truth was meant to be weighed carefully, though I knew appearances could deceive. Richard Hale walked beside me, his briefcase clasped tightly in one hand, his face unreadable. I drew a long breath as we entered the mediation room, its walls lined with legal books, its long table polished to a false shine. Lydia was already there, dressed as if for a gala, her pearl earrings glinting in the light. She didn't look at me, only at the judge seated at the head of the table, Ellen Carter, her posture rigid, her pen poised. We sat, the shuffle of papers filling the silence until Richard rose. He began with calm precision, placing documents before the judge ledgers, recording every loan Charles had extended to Lydia. Financial statements showing unpaid balances that stretched into the hundreds of thousands. He produced screenshots from Omar Patel, tracing the smear campaign directly back to Lydia's accounts. Sandra Price spoke next, her voice firm as she described how Charles had confided in her about Lydia's pressure to sell company assets. Miguel gave his statement as well, recounting the nights Charles returned from arguments with his daughter, exhausted and disheartened. Piece by piece, the picture formed. Lydia tried to maintain her poise, but the cracks showed. She leaned forward, her voice rising. "He always loved her more," she said, stabbing a finger in my direction. "Don't you see? It was never about the money, it was about her. He left me scraps. He made me beg. He gave everything to her." The room fell silent. Even Judge Carter's pen stilled for a moment. Richard let the words hang before speaking again. "Your Honor, the will is valid. The testimony and records speak for themselves. There can be no claim here but Mrs. Calhoun's." Judge Carter nodded slowly, then turned to Lydia. "You will sign these documents relinquishing all claims to the estate. That is the only path forward." Lydia's hand shook as she took the pen, her face pale, the glamour gone. She scrawled her name with a sharp stroke, then pushed the papers away as if they burned. I sat still, my chest tight, watching the mask of entitlement and arrogance slide from my daughter's face, leaving only bitterness beneath. The judge gathered the papers. Richard closed his briefcase, and I rose, knowing the next battle would not be in this room, but in the aftermath waiting outside. In the weeks that followed, the weight of the mediation settled like dust after a storm. News traveled quickly through Austin, not only of the court's decision but of the evidence laid bare. Lydia's name, once a fixture in charity boards and business circles, became a liability. Invitations vanished, whispers replaced praise, and her carefully curated image unraveled. Investors pulled out of her ventures one by one. A boutique project she had launched in Dallas folded within days when its primary backer withdrew. A tech partnership in Houston dissolved after Omar's reports surfaced, showing how funds had been siphoned recklessly. Each morning's paper seemed to carry another small piece of her downfall. The messages began soon after. "We're family. You owe me. One read. Another. Almost pleading Dad would want you to share." They came at all hours, her words slipping between anger and desperation. For a moment, I held the phone in my hand, staring at the familiar number. feeling the echo of lullabies once sung to her. Then I pressed the button, blocking it for good. Silence replaced her voice, heavy but final. And in that silence, I turned back toward the ranch, ready to build something Charles would have been proud to see endure. The ranch grew quieter once the noise of lawyers, reporters, and angry phone calls faded. But in that quiet, I found space to breathe. I met with Richard in his office again, not for battle this time, but for planning. Together, we set the foundation for a scholarship fund in Charles' name at Texas State Technical College. I remembered his words so often spoken at the dinner table that a man's worth wasn't measured in what he kept, but in what he gave others the chance to build. The first meeting with the college board was brief but powerful. Papers were signed, agreements made, and soon 50 students would have tuition covered. I left the campus with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months, as though Charles's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. At the company, Sandra introduced the profit-sharing plan for the drivers. They had labored for years without recognition, and now their loyalty was rewarded in concrete numbers. She told me later that morale had risen overnight, routes running smoother, men and women smiling as they loaded their trucks. Back at the ranch, I sat at Charles' desk with a fresh leather-bound book. The pages smelled of promise, blank but waiting. I began to write not his words this time, but mine. Each line carried forward what he had started, a legacy shaped not only by wealth, but by choice. The ink dried steady on the page, and I knew there was still one chapter left for me to write. The evening light stretched long shadows across the ranch as I stepped into the garden. The roses Charles had planted years ago glowed deep red in the fading sun, their scent drifting on the warm air. I bent to touch one bloom, careful of its thorns, and felt the memory of his hands in the soil, patient and steady, shaping beauty from earth. The silence was different now. For weeks it had felt heavy, haunted by absence and betrayal. Tonight it felt calmer, the kind of stillness that invited reflection rather than fear. Lydia's voice was nowhere, no more accusations, no more desperate texts. Her absence cut like a dull ache, but I knew some wounds were not meant to close. What remained was Charles' vision, alive in the choices I carried forward. The scholarships were moving ahead, young men and women preparing to begin studies that once seemed out of reach. The company was thriving again, drivers finally sharing in the success they helped build. I returned to the porch, the journals spread open on the table beside my own new pages. His handwriting and mine rested side by side, threads of the same story woven across generations. I sat back, listening to the cicadas rising with the dusk, and let the peace settle around me. The estate no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. The money wasn't his true legacy, our love, and what it built was.